You know, the thing is that the president's role is constitutional. It also has to be legal. And the president should not be put in a position that is being asked to cheat Kenyans, that the finance bill as presented from Parliament, not balancing, not showing how the deficit is going to be paid for, is something that the president should be asked to do. I think the buck stops with the Parliament first. I know that there's a problem that once the bill has gone through a third reading, there's no provision by which it can go back to Parliament unless the president gives a memo to Parliament. But what is most important is that I think this discussion is healthy. People sometimes are very casual with dealing with the budgetary issues. They don't realize the full effect of it. But one of the things is that if we don't have a way of paying for this deficit, it's going to affect our currency. Our currency is very strong at the moment. Actually, against the US dollar, it is the second strongest currency in the whole world. The second strongest. So those are positive things. We don't want to start affecting those because we don't have a balanced budget. Now, if we don't have a balanced budget, we'll have to do borrowing, which could result in the shilling actually falling by anything up to 20%. When that happens, Kenyans will end up paying more for fuel than they're paying at the moment.
President Uhuru Kenyatta is back in the country after quietly jetting back on Sunday evening. Kenyans have been eagerly waiting for his return in the hope that he will assent to the finance bill of 2018 to trigger the suspension of the 16% value-added tax on petroleum products that took effect on the 1st of September. The outrage that greeted the tax prompted Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich to meet with the National Assembly leadership over the issue. Now, the heat has since been unrelenting, with Kenyans expressing anger over the stringent measures put in place by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, which for years under the Kibaki administration kept off Kenyan fiscal issues. And tonight we are asking, where is the president? This is a big story this Wednesday night, September 12, 2018. I am Ben Kitili, live at the Standard Group Center. And that is the big story tonight. We shall be speaking very shortly to our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, who will be picking the brain of the Amani National Congress ANC party leader Musalia Mudavadi, a former finance minister in this country himself. We also have on the broadcast tonight Dr. Alex Awiti, the director, East African Institute, as well as Kwame Owino, CEO, Institute of Economic Affairs. We shall be talking to the three gentlemen here on the big story tonight to just find out and reignite this debate that is not going anywhere anytime soon. Let's begin with our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, joining us live from the city center to pick the brain of Musalia Mudavadi. Sophia, good evening.
Good evening, Ben. And the situation that Kenya finds herself in now is one that did not take place overnight, has elicited a lot of hue and cry. But this goes back to 2013 when the VAT Act became law. And in essence, Ben, this putting taxation on all petroleum products. However, Parliament, we saw then postponing this legislation for 3 years, actually, to 2016, and then a further 2 years to 2018. That deadline expiring on the 31st of August. But in the first place, what necessitated this law was a conditionality that was set by the IMF. In 2011, the Kenyan government, seeking to cushion itself from economic shockwaves, turned to the IMF for that standby facility, as it's called, to be able to get that cushion. As I described, the IMF, in agreeing to do so, maintained that Kenya needed to, in return, remove petroleum products from the bracket of tax-exempt goods or products, if you like. And so that happened. Kenya gave a commitment that, in fact, it would then introduce tax on petroleum products. So that is where we have come from. It has been years in the making. Here we are. Parliament has made that attempt once again to postpone this legislation taking effect. However, that bill yet to be received by the president is what we are understanding. We wait to see what action he'll take, if at all. But also remember, there has been a court order from a Bungoma Bungoma court stopping the implementation and the new taxation. However, that is yet to take effect. That order is yet to be adhered to. When the officers appeared before Parliament today, they were asked about why they haven't stopped the new prices or reverted back to the system and the prices that were there before. They claimed that they are yet to receive the court order. But tonight, let's speak to a man, as you said, Ben, who once served as Kenya's finance minister, Musalia Mudavadi. He's the ANC party leader, to get his insights on these developments. Thank you for making time for us. What do you make of the situation Kenya is in now, sir?
Well, first of all, I agree with you that Kenya is in a very awkward financial situation at this point in time. Extremely serious, actually. And anybody who is underrating the situation, particularly if they're in positions of authority, are doing this country a lot of disservice. We are in a serious situation. Now, to get to where we are, it's not an instant situation. It's a process that develops over time. So the way I look at it is that people would see that something was moving in the wrong direction, but they were not addressing it. And I think at this point in time to say that this is purely an IMF conditionality may not be exactly accurate. And I'll tell you why, because I've also had an opportunity to work with these institutions. The IMF will always ask one fundamental question, that if you intend to carry out the programs that you have, which you share with them when you're preparing the budget, when you are in the budget preparation process, they'll always ask you the other question, and how do you intend to finance these programs of yours? Okay? So all along, we have seen a pattern with the current government where there is an appetite for massive capital projects, massive infrastructure projects. Now, as long as you can fund them without putting pressure on your nation excessively, then it's okay. But we are in a situation where the government wanted to do so many roads within a short time frame. They wanted to do so many dams within a short time frame. They wanted to do the SGR railway and so forth, and so many other projects within a very limited time period. Now, what did they resort to? They resorted to rapid and uncontrolled public borrowing. This is where we have gone, and that is now why we find ourselves in this situation. And it carries all through. Even in a private enterprise, even if you are a manufacturer, you must have a proper balance between your equity and your debt, because to finance development, you need both.
Okay.
But you must not enter into a scenario where the debt overwhelms the equity.
Yeah. The government has argued that the focus they have had on these big mega infrastructural projects will pay off in the long run, that this is almost an investment to secure that spurred economic growth later on. It may not be felt or seen now, but with time, Kenyans will appreciate and understand these decisions. Do you agree with that thinking?
I don't agree with that thinking. I don't think it's right to stress your country and punish your country on the basis that there's going to be a future benefit so many years down the line. We have to have it measured, all right? All these countries that involve in infrastructure projects, they must have it measured. But you cannot, for instance, try and push everything down everybody's throat within a 4 or 5 year period. When you look at the debt portfolio of Kenya, you find that China, which was not a significant creditor in Kenya's books, has just built itself into the largest creditor in leaps and bounds, from virtually not appearing in the books to becoming the largest creditor. As at June this year, China alone is owed by the people of Kenya 520 billion Kenya shillings. The next largest creditor is Japan, who we owe about 90 billion Kenya shillings.
Right.
And then you have France at about 55 billion Kenya shillings. And then you have Germany at about 33 billion Kenya shillings. And then finally, you have Belgium with about 15 billion shillings. And then you have other creditors, which include the IMF and the World Bank, at another 520 billion Kenya shillings.
Yeah.
All right? Now, when you look at all this, you have to also ask yourself, what is the structure of this debt? How much of it is concessionary? How much of it is commercial? Unfortunately, at this point in time, for the first time in history, Kenya's external debt, public debt, has now exceeded Kenya's domestic public debt.
All right.
Now, let me just help in this, because I'm trying to make it as quickly as possible, bearing in mind your time. Now, here is the catch. Because the external debt has reached those proportions, the question now is that the central bank has been sending signals of caution as well. If now, for some reason, there's a depreciation of the Kenya shilling, the amount of exposure on Kenya becomes even bigger and more rapidly.
Yeah.
Now, this is something that we must be worried about.
So let me ask you this. Last week you talked about this not being about meeting the budget deficit, because there's a budget. Even if this 16% VAT tax is taken back in as far as implementation, that money still has to come from somewhere. What do you have to back up that claim that this is not about funding the budget, but about paying loans?
Well, one of the things that Kenyans may not know, but it's a fact, is that the installments of the Eurobond are due. About 100 billion, equivalent of Kenya shillings of the Eurobond, is due. It was supposed to have been paid sometime last year or towards the end of last year. I think the Treasury had to negotiate for postponement of that. You cannot postpone it further. So the pressure of the debts is now coming to bear. So the government has got to look for a quick way of looking for resources to start filling that gap. And the quickest way to try and raise some money will be on the petroleum products. It's the quickest and easiest for the government. Yet at the same time, it is the most painful to the Kenyan people.
So we're asking tonight, where is the president? All eyes on him, waiting to see what action he will take on this finance bill that will be taken to him. What do you expect from the president?
I think the president has got his advisors. But if I was to speak as a friend, I would first of all want to remind Kenyans that what you get from the IMF is what you negotiate for. All right? Now, in Parliament, there are some two issues that are very fundamental, which seem to be part of the agreement that was signed off. And I want you to know that to sign off an agreement, whether it was signed off in 2011 or 2013, normally the agreement of the IMF is usually signed by the governor of the central bank and the minister for finance. Those two are the ones that commit the country on any agreement, particularly with the IMF and World Bank situation. So that should be borne in mind. All right? So if you want to really go into this, then you must have to go back and find out then who was the Minister for Finance that executed that agreement, and who was the Governor of Central Bank that executed that agreement. If the agreement or the package involved removing, imposing VAT on fuel products. Okay? So if that's the case, I cannot speak for anybody, but I suspect that what is likely to happen, because there's the challenge of interest rates, the interest rate capping, which is an issue in that agreement with the IMF. Then there's the issue of the VAT. And then there's the issue of us not meeting our obligations, and how do we balance it so that at the same time the economy remains fairly stable. I would strongly propose, or I envisage a situation where Parliament or the President may have to consider lowering the top rate of VAT from the 16%, maybe to 12% or 10%, so that there's some loss of anticipated revenue in that component. But then, since this VAT is going to cut across the entire economy, it mitigates the fact that you are now putting it across. I also see a scenario where the President may have to propose to Parliament that could they also lend a hand as he mitigates on the VAT impact? Can they lend a hand in improving the economic environment by acceding to the lifting of the interest rate caps?
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, I see that as a possibility.
All right.
If I were to be asked, I would negotiate on those lines.
All right.
But let me close by just saying this, that this fuel thing is so serious. And when you look at it, and just look at fuel as an issue, and it's very cross-cutting. You know, it affects the fisherman in Lake Victoria, who's going to leaving very early in the morning to go and fish because his boat for the deep seas, deep waters, may require a motorized engine, which requires fuel. The same fisherman in Lamu, the same fisherman in Turkana. And then it comes to the homestead, the kitchen, the transport of the border. It affects across the board.
Yeah.
But just look at this. Take this as a takeaway from own government documents. On fuel, which we bring at 58 shillings to the litre in Kenya. And perhaps the ship that has brought it is also carrying a consignment that is headed to Uganda. All right? This shipment, the government of the day charges the pipeline throughput. Then the government charges excise duty. Then the government charges a merchant levy.
Right.
Then the same government charges the petroleum regulatory levy. Then it charges the petroleum development levy. Then it charges the road maintenance levy.
So it's a lot.
Then it charges the SGR levy. Look at that, about 7 tax centers, 7 roadblocks. If you're traveling from Mombasa to Voi, 7 roadblocks in the way.
Yeah.
And then now you add the 8th, which becomes the value addition tax at 16%. And this is one government collecting all these funds from the same person. And then our petrol becomes 128 shillings to the litre. And in Uganda, whose fuel passes through to Kampala, then sells it at 75 to 80 shillings per litre.
All right.
You can see the dilemma we are in.
All right, sir. Thank you very much for making time for us. Musalia Mudavadi, he's the ANC party leader. Unfortunately, our time up. Back to you, Ben. But clearly a country that's over-borrowing, overspending, and the big concern is that we do not see proposals around cutting down on expenditure or at least reducing the structure as far as what sees a lot of the wage bill also taking quite a bit from what taxpayers are able to pay to the taxman who never meets his targets. So what a situation we have, but looking forward to also hear what the economists you have on the other side have to say on this, Ben.
Thank you, Sophia. Sophia Anuna, our lead reporter tonight, talking to Amani National Congress ANC party leader Musalia Mudavadi, a former finance minister of the Republic, who had some very sobering thoughts on Kenya's fiscal and debt situation, both domestic and foreign. Let's now bring in the economist to try and put perspective for Kenyans on this. And we have with us Dr. Alex Awiti, Director, East African Institute, as well as Kwame Owino, CEO, Institute of Economic Affairs. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me tonight. Let me start with you, Mr. Owino. Why possibly could the president be still quiet on this issue of the 16% VAT on fuel? Mr. Owino, I don't know if you can get me. My first question to you is, of course, we are focused on the president and what the expectations of Kenyans was. We're expecting when he gets back from China, he was going to address this issue. But why could he still possibly be quiet until now?
Well, I think the president is...
Yes, go ahead.
Well, the president is quiet because he has a constitutional prerogative. He has three options. The first is to sign the bill immediately, which he didn't. The second would be to look at the bill, veto it, and obviously provide a memo, which is the tradition, though constitutionally there's no ground for it. And the third option is to let it be, and after 14 days it lapses and the bill comes into effect automatically. So he still has those options, and I think we shouldn't force his hand one way or the other with it. What I suspect, though, is that obviously he's aware of those options. I think as the Treasury continues to discuss with the budget committees and the committees of Parliament, it seems as if they're biding time as the 14-day clock runs down so that they can get a solution that's mutually acceptable.
A lot of people have blamed the CS for Treasury, Henry Rotich, and the PS as well, Kamau Thuge, and the rest at Treasury building for Kenya's current fiscal crisis, if you may. Where do you think the rain started beating the country?
Okay. Regarding the PS's position, I think blame first goes with Parliament. I think they passed this thing at the very last moment because the law was supposed to come in on the 1st. If they'd intended to shift it by another 2 years as they've done, they ought to have started this work early, and they did it right at the last minute. So obviously it's not the fault of the Cabinet Secretary in that respect. What I think the Cabinet Secretary ought to be careful and must take responsibility for is the fact that we have a court order, an injunction against the application of this law, and they're just ignoring it. I think that's a really, really bad signal, actually. It's immature behavior within a democratic culture. So in that way, they're simply ignoring the rule, and by that, actually violating law and being in contempt of court. It's not a good thing.
All right, let me come to Daktari. What is your opinion on this? I mean, on one hand, we have seen the National Assembly that has been postponing this for the last 5 or so years, and then we have Treasury, which is in charge of the country's fiscal planning. Who do you think takes the blame from where you sit?
Well, I guess, this has been a classical case of kicking the can down the road. Significant measures were to be taken at an earlier time to basically go after the principle of charging VAT on petroleum and the knock-on effects, which could be penalties to the economy. And that discussion should have been had maybe 4 or 5 years ago when this proposal first came. But over time, there's been lapses and people kind of conveniently forget. As you remember, 2017 was an election year, so 2016 would be an inopportune time for the president to even think about levying VAT on fuel because of the possibility of a backlash from the electorate. But I guess, as Honorable Mudavadi said, and as Kwame Owino has alluded to, I don't think we have many options in this situation. We have to face up to the reality that ours is a country that is overburdened by debt, and our revenue flows are not sufficient. As Honorable Mudavadi mentioned, VAT on fuel is perhaps the easiest place to raid if you're looking for easy, reliable money. It's easy to collect. It is efficient. There are very few. There's almost like not many opportunities for anybody to cheat or evade that tax. But one thing I must say is that in and of itself, VAT on any item of consumption is not illegitimate in any country. And the president and parliament have the full authority, and that's why we elect them to speak on our behalf. So what is the basis for the public to basically engage and to reshape this conversation in the sense that how do we take into account the pain that the ordinary citizens potentially will face.
Right.
But I think the bigger question really is the structure of our debt. That debt overhang and our fiscal policies, as well as this hugely expenditure-oriented budget, which is, as Mudavadi said, is on huge capital investment, on huge capital spending. The question is, where is the money going to come from? And the government clearly understands that 71 billion could easily be on the table from VAT on petroleum.
All right, we're coming back to talk about those deeper issues surrounding this very key issue for Kenyans. We are speaking to Dr. Alex Awiti, Director, East African Institute, and Kwame Owino, CEO, Institute of Economic Affairs. We are igniting that debate. It has been 2 weeks or so since that VAT was imposed on petroleum products, affecting a lot of things, including the cost of basic commodities. Don't go too far. This is a big story. We are back shortly with more of that debate.